and a developer, and they develop a particular fly according to their need that they see at the time. And it's usually a solution to a problem they see on the creek. So they develop a recipe, and some of these recipes, particularly in the classic flies, they're a set recipe. And if you vary from that recipe, you get something different than what the originator had intended. So if you, it's like a loaf of bread. I mean, if you got a really great tasting loaf of bread from your grandmother or your neighbor, and you decide, well, let's replace the flour with spirulina, and we're going to replace the sugar with salt, and so forth on down, you're not going to get the same tasting loaf of bread. And it's not going to work as well. It's not going to taste good. It's not going to look good. Might not even raise if you decide maybe not to use yeast or something. So sticking to the original recipe of the fly faithfully, you get the product that the developer came up with originally to resolve a fishing problem that he saw in a lake or a stream or a river. Once we start varying from that, we can't really call it that fly anymore. For instance, here's a beadhead. Whoops. Let me get this thing turned around. Here's a beadhead Prince Nymph that I tied earlier. The original Prince Nymph was actually without a beadhead, and it looked more like this one right here. Whoops, that got bent up out of shape. Yeah, but there's no bead on that. But that's more like the original Prince Nymph. The Prince Nymph, by the way, is a misnomer. It was actually called a brown forktail fly. And after a couple of years of using this and developing it, Doug Prince decided to start tying these for a tyer by the name of Benz. And Benz couldn't figure out, couldn't remember what Doug Prince had called it, so he called it the Prince fly, Prince Nymph. So that's how it came about. But here's another Prince Nymph. It is not really a Prince Nymph. As you can see, there's a red band around the belly. So I can't really call that a Prince Nymph, although it looks exactly like one except for the red band around the belly. I can call that a Coach Prince, or I can call it a Prince variant, and I can make that red, I can make it green, I can make it blue, however you want to do it. It adds a little extra sparkle and kick, and they work great. But again, you can't call it a Prince Nymph because then that confuses the recipe. You vary away from that. So I just wanted to make that statement. I've seen some videos here just lately, and I've seen some of the tyers that have been tying variations. And one guy on video changed one tiny little thing, and then he called it his own design. Well, it wasn't. It was somebody else's design that he changed a minor thing on. So we have to be kind of careful and give credit where credit is due to the original designers of some of these flies. Okay, I'm off my soapbox now. And I've got a hook and bead set up, ready to go. We're going to do a beadhead nymph on this. Let me give just a little bit more height. There we go. That's about as close as I can get. I don't have a 2X. I wish I did on this thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the bead. It's a gold bead, and it's on a 3X hook. When I use a beadhead, I usually go for a slightly longer hook, but this can be done on a 1X, it can be done on a 2X hook. This is actually a nymph hook. It's a little bit heavier than a dry fly hook, which gives it a little bit of extra weight as well. So we're going to start with, I use Ultra Thread 140. And I think I explained that before. The 140 I'm using for just about anything anymore. It's a pretty small thread. I don't have to worry about it breaking very much. So I can really get in there and sometimes torque the materials. Now, as you can see, I've got a really long tail on this. We're not going to cut the tail. We're going to leave it long for a little bit later. Or we're going to wrap the hook back to the tail. We are not going to take our thread past the bend. This is very important for how the tail sets up. And sometimes I tie a little bit of a bead on the end of this tail, just a tiny bit of a bead. Come back forward just a touch. We can use gold wire. I have small gold wire. Or we can use sulky thread. And I'm going to be using sulky thread. It shows up just a little bit better than the small gold wire. So we're going to tie that thread in on the length. Come back forward just a little. And then we're going to take the brown goose biot. I've done it with ginger, but the recipe says brown, so we're going to tie it with brown this time. And I do them one at a time. Oh, that's the danger here. That thread gets wrapped around. I tie these in one at a time. And I tie them on the flat of the hook. Make sure that that's on the shaft so that it doesn't hang down. We don't want it to hang down. We want it sticking straight out the back. You can see a nice little angle right there. That could be a little bit farther. We're going to take the second one in. Whatever angle we had on the first, we want on the second. So we want an actual forked tail. I'm going to trim these off. So you see a nice, pretty straight little tail. Clean that up a little bit. Now we're going to go back to here and we're going to tie in this is a number 14 hook, so I'm using 6 strands or 6 peacock herls. Take it right back to where we tied in those biots and then back to the front. Trim those off. I missed my trash sack. Someone coming over here later and vacuum. Now the thread that we tied, that we left, now we're going to wrap it up inside those peacock herls. See where that thread is? I'm using a device like this. It's an electronics probe. Catch all those strands together with the thread. Then I'm going to move it up a ways to room. And then we're going to trim off right in there. Because if you don't, it gets all wrapped up in your strand. So now I'm going to twist this counterclockwise, not too tight. And we're going to wrap it around. And this gives you a good solid bush. It gives you more strength. Make sure, though, that when you're wrapping it, it stays twisted. And wrap it all the way to just behind the bead. And then we tie it off. About 3 times, and then we can trim it. So we have a nice little thick body in there, which is really kind of nice to have. Then we're going to take, wrapped, as we're looking forward this direction, we wrapped clockwise around the hook. Now we're going to take our gold strand or gold wire, whichever you choose to use, and we're going to wrap counterclockwise so that the braid or the band sits above and rides on top of the herl. As you can see, this foil shows up a little bit nicer than the wire, and it actually strengthens the body so it lasts a little bit longer. And trim that off. Then we're going to take a spotted partridge feather, like so. We're going to strip off the fuzz at the back. And turning it around, we're going to pull this back. We're going to hang on to the very tip. We're going to pull this back a little ways, so we have a nice little tie-in point. We're only going to wrap this around the hook one time, so we don't need a lot back in this area. Two or three times to keep from the thread building up. And then we're going to trim that tip off. Take our hackle pliers, stick it in here like so. Dampen your fingers and pull these feathers back, because otherwise they can really get unruly. And we're going to take them down and around, well, basically until we run out. Almost looks like a wet hackle at this point. Pull those back, tie off, and then we're going to trim the stem off of there. These small little feathers, especially off the partridge, are very, very fragile feathers. You have to be kind of careful of them. But you can see we have a nice little hackle all the way around. Now the last step is we're going to take white goose biot and we're going to make wings. And we're going back to the top view again. We're going to set these wings just about body length, right about right in there. Hold that down. Might have to adjust it just a little bit. Okay, we got a nice little wing in there. And we're going to take the second one. Some of you who are more nimble than I am can probably tie these in together. I used to do that a long time ago, and I found that placing them one at a time is more precise for me. They're just a little bit more control. A couple strands around there, lift these back, a couple more around the behind the bead. Then we can trim off those biots. Finish with thread wraps to hide the biots behind that bead. Whip finish 4 or 5 times. Trim off your thread, and we're done. That's it, gentlemen.
So thank you, Jim. That looks a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. Real quick, Royce, could you tell us where we can find the materials? Is it going to be located in the little library, or is it back in the building now that the building's open?
Ask your question one more time, Kirk.
The materials, are they going to be located in that little library outside the building, or are they going to be located in the building now?
That's a good question. I thought the little free library was going to be nice because then people could go outside of business hours and pick them up. But I'm not convinced that it all ended up in the hands of our participants.
Yeah, I'm curious about that too, because there was one left when I went to look, and I wasn't sure if everyone had gotten one. And since I had stuff already, I left it there, but it got picked up by somebody.
Yeah, and when I sent the email and text asking people to let me know, The only people I heard back from was John said he got his, and Ron's, I believe you said, right, John?
Yep.
And then Lynn said she got one, and you replied, and so I don't know what happened to the rest of them. If we want to just try that again. Now, there was the material for the Prince Nymph in those bags, so anybody that has one of those bags has what they need to tie that fly.
Gary's on right now. Gary, did you get a bag? Gary's on mute. I don't know if he's listening or can hear me. Shake your camera if you can. Bark twice if you're in Milwaukee.
There we go.
There he's on. Gary, can you hear it?
You're muted.
Didn't someone get one? Oh, you said someone got one for Ron. Glenn got one for Ron.
Gary, did you get a fly tying kit from the outdoor campus 2 weeks ago?
Hey, Kirk, you're still recording. Do you still want to or no?
Yep, I'll stop that for now.